Hello, my name is Ioannis Dimitriou. I am a Senior Control Systems Engineer at the UK Atomic Energy Authority at the Remote Applications in Challenging Environments Department. In today's talk, I'm going to talk about HMI guidelines and how we use them here in RACE. I'm going to talk about the sources for creating such guidelines and the process that we use here, as well as the use cases and the lessons learned that we have over the course of redesigning and using the HMIs that we have here on site. So the aims of the talk is to have a review of telerobotic HMIs and guidelines for those HMIs, but also to see how this can be applicable more generally and specifically in our use case, and how we can learn and apply this knowledge across different applications. In UKA, we have the Joint European Torus, JET, which is a fusion machine. Maintenance of the fusion machine over the past 20 years has been done using telerobotics, like a Mascot and our telerobotic booms. We have over 35,000 hours of telerobotic operations. But due to obsolescence, we need to update the system. And one of the things we need to update is the user interfaces. Recreating these user interfaces is a massive undertaking and a big problem. For over the last 20 years, the operators have used a very specific set of interfaces. And there is a specific look and feel on them. But there is no guidelines of telling us how to recreate that look and feel. We need to learn from over those 20 years of operations and find areas where we can improve. And on the other side, we need to learn from 20 years of design innovation and bring that into the new design. There are a number of sources that can help us with our design and can help us define areas for improvement. There is the ISO 9241 series that talk a lot about ergonomics and use of HMIs. We have the ANSI ISA 101.01 that describes the use of HMIs for efficient systems. And of course the Web Content Access Guidelines version 2.1 that tells us a little bit more about accessibility, as well as a massive trove of design websites such as material.io, which can allow us to get a lot of ideas and new developments in terms of design for HMIs. However, for telerobotics, there isn't something that fits exactly what we want to do. Telerobotics is a very specific application and deviates from some of those guidelines that focus a lot on the process or on the more general content of that is on the internet. So the first step we need to look is to define the process for designing our guidelines and our HMIs. The biggest improvement is taking into account our users, the human in the loop design. So we first start with our intended users and our intended environment. We define who our users are, what the use case is. And then based on that, we look at what our guidelines and our philosophy or our design is. This is very specific for our telerobotic use case. Now, based on that, having defined our guidelines, having defined our use cases and our principles for our design, we can set to create a style guide that is very specific, and this is with a look and feel that we're trying to achieve. Once we have that, then we can create a set of tool sets. These tool sets will allow us to interpret that style guide and make it easy the creation of new HMIs. We want those HMIs to be consistent and to always follow that rule set that we have created. During this process, we need to have continuous feedback with our users in order to ensure that our HMIs are suitable for their use. First in this process is defining our users and our environment. Now, our users are expert users. They've been trained in using these machines for months or years. The processes that they use these machines are fast and responsive. Often, there's a high impact of any mistakes. And the system that they use, they are complex systems. So this is the use case and our environments that we use our systems. Having defined our users and our environments, the next step is to look at our design philosophy. For telerobotic HMIs, we need HMIs that are highly usable. They are efficient, effective, and satisfactory for the user to use. We need HMIs that are robust and reliable for when they're being used. We need HMIs that reduce errors and limit the errors. That means that they're responsive, they are clear, and they are consistent. And finally, we need a design that is human-centric and user-centric and uses the knowledge and the experience of the users in order to drive the design. So having defined those guiding principles, we can look at our sources and then define a set of guidelines that will help us into defining further down our style guide. So for the next step, I'll talk a bit about some of these guidelines and how the previous system would violate those. So first, we need to look at accessibility. Accessibility aims to limit user fatigue, as well as look at design elements such as colors, contrast, size, and distinguishable features in order to make our HMIs more accessible to more users. An important aspect of accessibility is personalization, where users can personalize the HMIs for their own use. Now, this is very specific to application, and it can be very detrimental for certain applications where users share the same station. So this, as it can be very disruptive, has to be looked at with a specific application. For our application, our users often share the same station, so personalization is reduced to a minimum to avoid errors. The next set of guidelines revolve around clarity. Clear HMIs are HMIs that have elements that are clearly identifiable, controls that are unambiguous in their interpretation, and the information is not disruptive for the use of the HMI. Guidelines of clarity involve around organizing and presenting the information in a clear way. The next set of guidelines is around consistency. Consistent HMIs limit the errors from the users, and they also make it easy to switch from one HMI to another. Consistency is not just about how the information is shown across one HMI, but it also involves external consistency, so how the users perceive the same information, not just in the wider world, but also within the general applications. In the jet remote handling system, we have HMIs that control similar telerobotic devices. In order to be consistent, the layout between one HMI and the other HMI need to be similar, and the information need to be presented in a similar way so that when a user moves from one to the other, they can maintain that internal consistency. The external consistency have to do with things about how we do things in RACE and in UKAA. So certain colors or certain icons that we use internally in documents or in other processes have to be the same in the HMI in order to maintain that external consistency. The next set of guidelines is around conciseness. This involves about minimalism and removing clutter and unnecessary information from the HMI. The HMIs are tools for the users to use, and they have to have only the necessary information that they need in order to perform their tasks. Anything else is superfluous and should be removed from the HMI. The last set of guidelines revolve around responsiveness. We want to create responsive HMIs that have low delays, fast response times, and they match the perception of the user. These guidelines revolve around how fast and how slow we present information to the users so they can perceive that information, how fast the system responds to the user action, and finally, showing that the system is busy to the user when the system is thinking. In this video, I talked about the process for creating new HMIs and the guidelines that we have put together in order to create these new HMIs. The process for creating those guidelines was very iterative, and it included a lot of consultation and feedback from the users. And it was based on the modern standards and best practices. However, this is a process, and this is the first step in the process of creating new HMIs. The next step is using those guidelines to create a style guide that captures the look and feel of the jet remote handling system. And then we can go back and refine our guidelines and our style guide to perfectly match the experience and operations that we want to achieve using those guidelines. Perhaps the most important conclusion from this video is this precise interaction between users, developers, designers and operators in order to create the HMI system for the intended operation. This work has been a collaborative team effort from designers and operators in order to design the specific guidelines. Thank you for listening.